You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Oh, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week on Boomers Today, we bring you important, useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. I just want to thank everybody again. I always want to thank people for all their support. Our listeners are growing each and every day, and it's because of all of you, getting the word out to your friends and family. Many of our shows are being listened to on radio stations throughout the country. Many of you are listening to our podcast version, which appears on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Stitcher, and of course we have our own app, the Boomers Today app, that you can get on your iPhone or Android phone for no cost. Just download it and you can listen to it while you're going for your walks in the morning or the afternoon. And so anyway, I want to thank everybody for all their support. And the reason we're getting so many listeners is because of our great guests that we bring on and inform us on all sorts of wonderful information. And today's going to be no different. We have with us Patricia Daiker, who is a registered nurse, board-certified nurse coach specializing in diabetes burnout, and author of the online eCourse, Better Diabetes Life. She has been an RN for 35 years, practicing bedside at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas for 15 years, primarily in the emergency department and credentialed as a certified emergency nurse. She currently is the CEO and founder of Better Diabetes Life, a company whose mission is to deliver support and services to people with diabetes and other chronic illnesses who are experiencing the psychosocial burden we know as burnout. So, Patricia, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. I really appreciate it.
Well, Frank, thank you. You're welcome. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to share this information with your listeners.
Well, thank you. And I know we're going to talk about diabetes burnout and what that is all about. But before we do, I think it'd be a good idea just to talk about. Listen, there probably isn't an adult on this, certainly in this country and maybe even around the world, that hasn't heard of diabetes. However, maybe not everybody really understands what it is. So maybe you could explain what diabetes is. And I know in our discussions earlier that you yourself have diabetes, and maybe you could talk about that and how you got diabetes, and how do people get it, or how do they prevent it? I mean, that's really a loaded question there, but I'll let you take it from there.
That is a lot. That's a big topic, but we can get through it. It's actually quite simple. So diabetes is a condition where you have problems with glucose regulation. And glucose is derived from the foods you eat, mostly sugars and carbohydrates. So when you eat those foods, when you digest the food, they end up in your bloodstream as glucose. For the human body to function, we need insulin to get that glucose from the bloodstream inside the cell, and it acts as fuel for the individual cells in your muscles and different parts of your body. When diabetes happens, there's a problem with the insulin, and insulin is what lets it get inside. So there's several different types, and I'll touch briefly on the three that are most common. So type 1 is a lack of insulin, and that's what I have. Type 1 is typically caused by a viral infection or something that sets off your immune system, and your own immune system attacks the cells in your pancreas that makes insulin. And so if you have type 1, you have to take insulin for the rest of your life. You don't make any. Type 2 is more common, and it's where you have insulin resistance. And so you actually have a lot of insulin. Your body just doesn't recognize it or use it very efficiently. And so in either case, you don't have enough insulin to get sugar into your cells, or you have too much insulin that doesn't work. In both situations, you end up with too much glucose in your blood, causing problems. And the third type I'll touch on is gestational diabetes, and that's similar to type 2 in that it's mostly related to insulin resistance caused by hormones, typically in the placenta. But basically you're just not regulating sugar well.
Got it.
At the end of the day, all that extra sugar in your blood causes damage and the complications and that thing. So the treatment is all about trying to get your blood sugar levels normal. There's many different ways we can do that. But in a nutshell, that's what it's about. It's about this glucose regulation gone awry.
Okay. So
you asked me about...
Yeah, I asked you about the, how you got it. But maybe before you talk about that, I have a question for you. So I, quite some time ago, was diagnosed as being a, quote, pre-diabetic. And I made some changes in my diet and exercise, and now things are kind of, sort of back to normal. So explain that maybe to people a little bit, that somebody may not be a diabetic, but maybe they're getting close, and there's things they can do to, hopefully avoid them moving into the diabetic category, I guess.
Absolutely. So, life doesn't happen in big jumps. It's usually kind of a continuum, and that's what prediabetes is. So we're getting into this place where your insulin you've become resistant to insulin. And so for a long time, your body compensates. Our body's a very smart machine, and if one part's not working, other parts pick up and try to correct the problems. So prediabetes is when you're becoming insulin resistant, but your body starts making more insulin and is keeping the blood sugars normal. You might be a little bit high, but not high all the time, and it's not acutely a problem. People can correct that by several different factors. So one is diet. So if we reduce the carbohydrates we eat, then we don't need to make as much insulin, and therefore we decrease the demand on our body. And two, exercise is a good activity because it actually makes you more insulin sensitive. So if we're reducing the carbohydrates, we're exercising, moving about, then some of the factors that were leading us to become insulin resistant are limited, right? Where we're pulling those back so they're not such a big issue. And so you have the propensity maybe to get diabetes if you would have continued with those behaviors that were leading you in that direction. But that pre-diabetes is you're heading that way, you're just not there yet. And I'd also say that, with the pre-diabetes and the all that stuff, it's very much tied to lifestyle and exercise, but it's not. So not everybody that eats a certain way or doesn't exercise is going to get diabetes. There's a correlation. So there's a correlation, not necessarily a cause, because we all know certain people that eat crazy and don't do anything and they don't get diabetes. So there's like a genetic component to that as well.
Got it. And if you don't mind, talk about your situation. You are diabetic, but you got it kind of in a unique manner. It had to do with your own work that you do each and every day. You want to talk about that?
Absolutely. So I'm a boomer right now. I was born in 1964, so I'm at the very tail end of the boomer group, but I am in the boomer group. But back when I was 26, that's when I was working in the emergency department at Baylor, and I started losing a lot of weight. And honestly, I was a girl in my 20s. I was thrilled. I could eat whatever I want, and my waistline was dropping. I worked nights. I worked in a very busy emergency department. And for me, I really just was tired a lot. I just was so tired. And it wasn't sleepy like I work nights tired. It was kind of a bone weary, I've never been that tired before in my life. And so, but again, I was working nights. I wasn't sleeping. I had just bought a house. I was very busy. And I had and this is kind of an unsettling event, but it's actually what happened. So when you work in the ER, there's a phone that rings to alert you to an incoming ambulance. And that phone rang, and I had this brief thought in my head, and this is horrible, but I thought, I hope it's a gunshot wound to the head, because that won't take very long, and that's horrible because they don't survive very often. But that was physically and mentally, I didn't know how I could care for somebody for a long time, like somebody that was going to take hours and hours of attention. So as a nurse, the fact that that thought even floated through my consciousness bothered me. It just wasn't okay. And that's actually what made me seek treatment. Not even treatment. I saw my doctor and I'm like, hey, something's going on. I am just bone weary. I just can't, I'm not wanting to do what I should be doing. I don't have the energy. Just the fact that I even thought that just was not okay. And so he's like, well, what's been going on? And I explained him, working nights, I bought a new house, I'm busy. And so he's like, well, get some sleep, don't, eat good food, come see me. So I went and saw him, and my fasting blood sugar was 140, which isn't that high. It's not crazy, but a fasting should be under 100. And so he's like, well, I don't know, maybe you're just stressed. He said, so when you're back at work, when you're in the ER working, check your blood sugar. And this was back in the day when things weren't under such lock and key like they are now. But so he checked my blood sugar, and the first time I checked it, like after a meal when I wasn't fasting, it was over 300. And that's classic. It's high. It was bad. So fast forward real quick. A lot of things happened, but lab tests revealed that I had insulin antibodies. So that was that meant type 1. So my own immune system was attacking my pancreas, and at that time, I was kind of in the honeymoon stage. I caught it pretty early. But yeah, so I didn't start on insulin right away, but they knew I would be. So I had this kind of honeymoon period. And so we're like, how did this happen? So I'm one of 7 children. I have 40 or 50 cousins. My mom's one of 7, like big Irish families. And there is not one type 1 or type 2 diabetic in my family at all. So I'm a fluke. It just didn't make any sense. But we remember, my friends and I started talking, and a couple of months before I got this, this weight loss and fatigue, I had a really weird rash, and I didn't feel great. And I was at work, and they're like, I don't know what you have. Maybe you have chicken pox. You need to go home. Well, I went home, and it never turned into chicken pox. It kind of just went away. But it was such an unusual rash and a viral illness that I probably got. And so the theory is that I got a virus, some kind of unusual virus, likely from one of the patients that I cared for, and that virus set off an immune response, and my body attacked my own pancreas.
Wow.
So, and that was, again, I was 26, so that was back in 1991. Yeah.
So how did you get involved, and we'll talk more about your course and all of that, but how did you get involved in educating people on diabetes? You've become a diabetes educator. What was the incentive for doing that, and at what point did you do that in your career?
Right. So I'm actually not a diabetes educator, so that's actually a very specific credential. That's who you see in the endocrinologist's office.
I see.
They're going to help you with your pump. They're going to help you with how to take insulin, that sort of thing. So I'm actually a coach. But to answer your question, I'll answer it in 2 parts. I struggled with diabetes. I had all the clinical training. I had worked in ICU for several years prior to the ER. So when I was diagnosed, I knew how to take care of patients in diabetic ketoacidosis. I had seen patients on dialysis. I had seen patients with strokes and heart attacks. I'd seen people in the ER that were newly diagnosed with diabetes. I'd seen people that their blood sugar went low. Like, I was very intimately familiar with this disease, knew how to care for it. The interesting part was I didn't want to do it. So even though intellectually I knew, I struggled for years and years and years, and I couldn't do it perfectly. And I'm kind of a type A person. And so I fought. Some days I didn't do it at all. Other days I was really perfect. I didn't go anywhere. I just was diabetes. That's all I did. And it was certainly an emotional roller coaster. And about 3 years in, I was just done with it. I couldn't do it anymore. Mentally, I was exhausted. And now I know I was burnt out. At the time, I didn't realize that was the problem. But I couldn't keep it up. I couldn't keep playing this game. I couldn't win. And so I went to see a therapist at the encouragement of a friend of mine was going through a divorce, and she's like, you need to talk to my lady. She's great. So during that time, what I found out was that diabetes wasn't my problem. It was how I coped with hard things. And so my go-to strategy prior to this was avoidance. If something was bad and hard, I didn't want to deal with it. And so what I learned, and what's been the launch board, I guess, if you will, are twofold. One is that experience was that clinical knowledge and understanding what to do was not enough. You had to learn how to manage and develop. I've learned this term to be very, like, I guess I would call it now, resilience. I wasn't very resilient before. I would get knocked down and I couldn't get back up. And over the course of years, and with being aware of what I was doing and changing kind of my mindset, I learned how to not let this beat me up. So that was huge, because that let me go live my life and do things and follow purpose and seek out my passions and not only look at my limitations. So that's one piece. The second piece was after a couple years, let me think, about 8 or 9 years after diagnosis, I pursued kind of a secondary passion of mine. And I'm kind of a nerd geek, and I love computers. And so I was diagnosed in 91. 2000, I went to work for a software company, and I was in the software industry for about 17 years. And that was a ride of a lifetime. Had so much fun, loved it. But the interesting thing that I learned in corporate America that they don't talk about in the clinical setting are things like, so I learned a lot about sales, why people make purchase decisions, why they decide to do this versus that, how people get along in groups, how people interact and what makes somebody motivated or not. I had to get emergency department doctors to use software, and they didn't want to. And just educating them on all the reasons why they should wasn't successful. So to get that change management and to get people's buy-in, you had to understand what's in it for them. Why would they want to do this? I could go on and on about the lessons learned in corporate America that translate into diabetes. So how do you get somebody to do something they don't want to do? So all these things. So over the course of these two separate careers, things started to click and gel. And during that time as well, I was frustrated with the medical system. I was trying really hard. It just never seemed like it was enough. No matter when I went to the doctor, they wanted more. They wanted better. They wanted more. And my numbers were great. I wasn't doing anything wrong. But that's the medical system. The doctor's purpose is to find a problem to help you solve it. And so if you go see a doctor 3 or 4 times a year and there's always a problem, it can be daunting. So you take that whole kind of mess, all that, and I look at how I've developed resilience, how I've developed a different attitude, how I live joyfully with diabetes. I don't hate it at all. I don't hate this part of my life. And I thought that's what's missing in healthcare. People need to have this support that's not just about what to do, eat right, exercise, diet. Well, we all know that. Like, there's not really probably anyone listening to this call, diabetic or not, that doesn't know if we eat better, if we exercise, and, we do all these things, we'll be healthier. That's not the problem. The problem is, how do we do it? Right. So that's what my course is all about, are these other skills that help you engage and choose to do it. And that's what nurse coaching is all about as well. It. Nurse coaching, yeah.
Thanks for correcting me on that. The difference between a nurse coach and a diabetes educator. So we're going to take a real quick break. I promise, just to recognize our sponsor. When we come back, I want you to tell people how they can get in touch with you and learn about your course. And we're going to touch on diabetes burnout, a little bit more on that. So I want to remind everybody that today's show is sponsored by Senior Care Authority, an elder care consulting organization that has a national network of professionally trained and experienced local advisors to assist families in determining the right path for your loved ones. They'll discuss various long-term care options, whether it's in-home care, assisted living, memory care, or if you just need an advocate to get some advice from. A local senior care authority advisor can help you now. So for a free initial consultation with an advisor in your area, contact Senior Care Authority at 888-809-1231, or you can go directly to the website at www.seniorcareauthority.com, and you could find an advisor in your area. We're back with Patricia Daiker, who's a registered nurse, board-certified nurse coach, specializing in diabetes burnout, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. First, Patricia, let everybody know how they can learn more about your organization and learn more about your course. You have an online course, and how they can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. So my website is betterdiabeteslife.com, and everything's on there. You can access my course there, and the course actually is something you can do online to learn some skills that help you with burnout that we're going to talk about. I also post frequently on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and those handles are at Better Diabetes Life. So if you like those social platforms, I blog a lot. So I try to give this inspiration, share stories, share industry news, things that I think are interesting to the diabetes lifestyle. And so those are all free on the site. But my site is betterdiabeteslife.com.
Great. So diabetes burnout, what exactly is it? What's the cause of it? Who gets it? Tell us more about diabetes burnout.
Okay, so I love to share stories. I'm gonna have your listeners go through this exercise, and I'll tell you a story that will explain it better than I can. So I want you to think of the worst customer you ever had. And maybe it's a customer, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it was a teacher, maybe you're a teacher and it was a student. But there's this person that you know that every time you know you're going to be around them, you just know it's going to be antagonistic. And I've never met a person who didn't have somebody come to mind, and I have my person in my head. So if you imagine that person, and now imagine they're your roommate 24/7 for the rest of your life. You have to live with them. You have to buy things for them. You have to spend your money on what they want, not what you want. And it's this unwanted roommate that you get, right? So that's diabetes. Nobody wants it. Nobody likes it. Nobody asks for it. And it's an unnecessary burden, and it's hard. So if you can imagine living with that person, at some point you're going to get sick of it. Like, you already don't like this person, and there's going to be a time where you don't want to deal with it anymore. So burnout may look like, for a person with diabetes, I'm not going to test my blood sugar. I'm just going to eat whatever I want. I'm not going to tell anybody that I'm not doing X, Y, Z. I'm going to hide things from people. It might be just overwhelming sadness. I'm overwhelmed with all of this. I just can't do this anymore. It has many different nuances, but the end result is you abandon your care. Like, I can't do this anymore. And you could think of burnout. There's burnout at work. If you're in a job that you don't like, you can get to a point where you're phoning it in. You're doing the bare minimum. You could be burned out in a relationship. So burnout with diabetes is especially difficult, because if we don't do what we need to do, then we have blood sugars that are out of control, and then we have those complications and things we worry about. The interesting thing, I think, about burnout is nobody tells you about it.
Right.
We talk about what to do, but nobody tells you what to do when you get to this point. And you ask who gets it, everybody gets it. You cannot have diabetes for the rest of your life and deal with the unpredictable nature of the illness, because it's not just because you do all the right things. Diabetes doesn't always play fair. So sometimes your numbers are out of whack and you can't figure out why. There's just not always a rhyme or reason. We try our best, but it's a very complex set of things going on inside your body that you're trying to manipulate a couple variables for. So at some point, it's frustrating and you just get tired of it. And so that's where this burnout comes in. And a lot of times in the medical world, I know now, I didn't realize at the time, we call people non-compliant. oh, they're non-compliant, they're not doing what the doctor said. My belief is that they're doing the best with what they have. They may just be at a point where they don't know where they can't go on anymore. It's too hard. It's overwhelming. They're working hard. They're not getting results, and they give up. So I feel like noncompliance in the medical vernacular is almost judgmental. You're not doing it right, Right. And I don't think anybody out there is on purpose really trying to be bad, quote unquote. So burnout isn't about...
Yeah, go ahead, Patricia.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say burnout isn't about effort, right? It's about mindset. And if you think of of us as people, as mind, body, and spirit, so what we, how our physical form works, that's where diabetes shows up. But we also have our mental aspect, which is our beliefs, our hopes, our emotions, our feelings. And then we have this spirit side of us, which is our purpose, our passion, things that light us up. Those things all need to be addressed. We can't just focus on the body, because if the mind and the spirit aren't willing, they're not going to do the work that the body needs to take care of itself.
Got it. Well, so I have just a follow-up question to all that. You were just talking about how, people may give up or don't take care of the things they're supposed to take care of. When someone it seems as though diabetes is easily, from a medical standpoint, detectable. If you run the right tests, you could determine. Is it normal when someone just goes in for a physical or a normal checkup? Could it be missed if the person, the patient, is not expressing to the doctor certain symptoms? Is it a normal course of action for a physical to check to see if certain levels are high, or is that something that somebody needs to always ask?
So it depends on your doctor. It depends, right? There is no one way to practice medicine. But typically when you go see a doctor for an annual physical, especially at our age, they're going to draw some lab work. And that lab work includes at least a blood sugar level. Now, if you're fasting and you haven't eaten in a long time, that number could appear normal, even if you were symptomatic. But if you haven't eaten in a long time, you could look like it's normal, because that's just a snapshot of right now. If you're having symptoms, definitely talk to your doctor. So symptoms might be things like frequent urination, you go into the bathroom a lot, weight loss. Sometimes we lose weight, although with type 2 we tend to see weight gain. But you're going to have things like maybe feeling extra tired, right? That's probably the most common symptom, and it gets overlooked, because if we go back to that cellular description we talked about at the beginning, glucose needs to get into your cells because that's the fuel. And if that process is broken, you're not going to have energy. So a lot of times energy is what you may not notice. But to your point, typically doctors are going to check your blood sugar. If you think you may have a history of diabetes, something's not right, you're not feeling great, you're feeling tired, you have sores that aren't healing, different things like that, your doctor will want to do an A1C, and an A1C is a test that measures your average blood sugar over 3 months. So that's going to tell you if you can get it down for the blood test day and you have a good number that day, you might sneak by. But over 3 months, if there's an issue, it's going to show up over the 3 months. So the A1C is how you can even find the pre-diabetes like you're talking about.
Got it. Boy, I could talk to you much longer on this subject matter. It's so important, and I really appreciate so much you taking the time to join us today on Boomers Today.
Well, Frank, it was my pleasure. Happy to share this with everyone.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us on Boomers Today. Please be safe out there, and we'll talk to everybody real soon.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.